Hello, welcome to the Haymarket Pub and Brewery. I'm Pete Crowley, brewmaster, owner, beer lover. We're going to take a little tour of the brewery. Let's walk through the bar first. Let me show you, we have 48 taps. We feature up to 13 of our own beers. And then we also have 13 to 15 guest beers from U.S. craft brewers. All of the beer that we brew and that we feature from other breweries is either a classic Belgian style or a contemporary American craft beer. A lot of hops, a lot of Belgians, a lot of bourbon barrel-aged beers. So a very complex, very interesting lineup of beers. We particularly fell in love with Belgian beers on a trip to Belgium about 15 years ago. And since then I've been creating and researching and developing many different Belgian styles. And then we also are madly in love with hops. So we always feature Belgian IPAs and American IPAs, double IPAs, imperial IPAs. So if you're a fan of flavorful, complex brews, then we are definitely your brewery.
So wait, how many do you have?
We have, depends on the time of year and the time of day. We can feature up to 16 total of either our beers or guest beers, but it fluctuates. Sometimes we'll get down to like 10 of our beers, and then but we'll fill the holes up with more guest beers. And we also always feature U.S. craft brewers that are either friends of ours or that we're really kind of proud to feature their beers. So everything we have on is very high quality and very small batch stuff. We don't have anything on tap that's mass produced. A lot of the beers we have on tap, they're so rare you can only get them in certain regions of the country, or sometimes there's only 3 or 4 of the kegs that are in Chicago at all. So it's pretty cool. Oh, we've got a 100-seat dining room that we wanted to make cozy and comfy. There are 20 TVs, all with their own receivers, so it's easy to watch every single game that's on. We love our sports. We also love our beer and our food. We're going to walk over to the brew house, which is easy to see from both the bar and the dining room. So we've got a 15-barrel brewery. We make a lot of different styles of beer. Only a handful of our beers are on all the time. Our flagship beers are Matthias Imperial IPA, our Mother Jones Abbey Double, and our Spiekerswagen Pilsner make a lot of appearances. But in 2011, we brewed 110 batches of beer, and about 90 of those were one-offs or different. So we'd like to keep variety, keep a lot of things changing, keep it interesting and exciting. The main brew house is consisting of 3 tanks: the hot liquor tank, which holds and heats hot water; the brew kettle, which is, are we walking? Oh.
Hot liquor tank.
So we have 3 tanks in the brew house. We have the hot liquor tank, which is a steam-jacketed vessel that holds and heats hot water. Then we have the brew kettle, which is a 15-barrel brew kettle, holds about 450 gallons. And it's also steam-jacketed. This is where we're going to boil the liquid once we get to that point. But the real starting point and kind of the fun and big part of the brew house is our mash tun. The mash tun is where everything begins. The mash tun has rakes inside of it, and this is where we're going to start with the first ingredient of beer, the malted barley. The malted barley is cracked open and put into the mash tun with hot water from the hot liquor tank, and that mixes up and kind of creates a big, almost like an oatmeal, like a bowl of oatmeal. So starting the brew is similar to 2 things. It's similar to making oatmeal and also brewing coffee, because coffee, you don't want the grounds, you want the liquid. So the mash tun is like a big coffee filter. So we make a big batch of oatmeal, but in this case it'll be malted barley, and then the water dissolves all of the starches from the grains and releases enzymes in the grains. The enzymes will convert and break down the starches into fermentable sugars. So you're going to get maltose and dextrin in the mash tun, and it's that maltose that the yeast is going to eventually eat once we get down to that step. So really the brew house, you're not making beer, you're making liquid. So what's going to happen is once we drain the liquid off of the malted barley, it goes into the boiling kettle, and at that time you now have the flavor, the aroma, and the color of all of the barley. But now we need to boil it because we want to sanitize it because we're going to put fresh, clean yeast into it, so you need to have a sanitary environment. And also now we're going to add hops. Hops, the third ingredient, comes off of a plant, grows on vines. Pacific Northwest is a huge hop growing region. The majority of our hops come from Washington, Oregon, and Idaho, and are processed up in the Yakima Valley. Hops will give you bitterness, flavor, and aroma. So you have bitterness, flavor, aroma, and color from barley, and then you also have bitterness, flavor, and aroma from hops. So there's a lot of variables just in the brew house alone that will make beers different. The amount of alcohol in a beer comes from the amount of barley that you use, because you get more sugar from more barley. So you can change the alcohol content in here, the color, the flavor, the aroma. So this is where all the complexities of beer begins, and this is where the brewmaster gets creative. This is where the recipe begins. This is how there's 2,000 breweries in this country, and they all make very, very different beer. And this is where it begins. And then the next step, once we have this liquid that is hopped and has all of the nutrients and all of the sugar and sweetness and color of the first ingredients, is going to go into the fermentation room, which is going to be our next journey. And that's where the fourth ingredient in beer and another huge variable, yeast, is involved. So we decided to build the restaurant, so the heart of the restaurant, the kitchen and the brewery, is open for all to see. So in order to get rid of all of the beer that you just consumed, you have to walk through it. That's where the restrooms are. So the guys are all working hard. Hi, everyone wave. Hoo! So we like to have the customers can sit right here on a Friday night. They can watch everything get made, and then they can watch the beer ferment away and the serving tank, which is what we're going to see. But we're going to start with the fermentation room. So we're going to walk in here. And it's true, I don't know if you can pick that up on the mic, but we play classical music for our yeast. So our fermentation room consists of 7 fermenters. Is that too loud? Oh, cool. We have 7 fermenters. They're all jacketed with a coolant called glycol, so we can control the temperature of fermentation. Lagers ferment colder than ales, and different strains of lager and ale yeast all have different temperature ranges. So the variable here, again, on top of all the different kinds of barley and hops and the amount of each that you use, we now have an ingredient that is extremely variable in that different temperatures affect different flavors, and different yeast strains will actually create different flavors. So an example is a German Hefeweizen. If you ever had Paulaner or Franziskaner or even Summit wheat from Minneapolis, you're going to get a lot of banana and clove in that beer. That comes from the yeast. The ale yeast creates those flavors in fermentation. The opposite end of that spectrum would be a German lager yeast, which is in our Pilsner. Ferments very slow, very cold. It's very neutral. You don't get a lot of aromatic and flavor qualities from it. And then if you look at Belgian yeasts, Abbey ale yeasts, Belgian wheat yeasts, English ale yeasts, you get different levels of fruit, whether it's plum or apple. There's all kinds of flavors and spices that come from the yeast itself. So you could take the same recipe that you made in the other room and use 7 different yeast strains, and you'd get 7 different beers. So the fermenter has a jacket that's full of glycol, which is a coolant. So this piece is the coolant cycling the tank, because during fermentation, the yeast, when it breaks down the sugars and creates alcohol and carbon dioxide gas, also releases energy, so it releases heat. So fermentations can get very warm. So you need to keep the yeast at a comfortable range depending on the type of yeast. So an example is our lager yeast ferments at 50 degrees. Our house American ale yeast ferments about 70. We've got some Belgian strains that ferment in the mid-70s, and we've got a Saison yeast that we ferment in the 80s. So it depends on this type of yeast, but the tank is able to keep it cool. So this tank is completely full. This is actually, what's this, tank 3? This is going to be a Belgian Pale Ale. What this is here is a kind of a blow-off tube, because the yeast is creating gas. It needs to go somewhere. We also do some carbonation in our fermenters by sealing it up, and the yeast creates gas, which creates pressure, which carbonates the liquid. So there's a way that you can actually naturally carbonate the beer in the fermenter. So that's where the bubbles come from, the yeast. So during fermentation, it's breaking down those sugars, it's releasing carbon dioxide gas and alcohol, and then it's also creating a lot of aromatic compounds depending on the strain of yeast and the type of yeast. All right, so now we're in the beer distribution center. So this is pretty cool. I spent a lot of time with my installation guy designing this draft system, so I'm pretty proud of it. This is where all the beer in the whole building comes from when you're drinking it. So it's kind of chilly in here. We keep the room at about 40 degrees. We've got a regulator and a beer pump on every single tap because different taps are different lengths. And if the beer is a different length coming out of the same tank, you need to be able to adjust the line pressure to make sure it pours properly. So we're able to put any of our serving tanks, which are all these bad boys, on any tap, and we can pour any tap at any pressure. So it's very important when you have different beers with different carbonation levels to be able to adjust the pressure on the kegs, on the tank, and on the line. So it's kind of a science project that it's going very well. But you can see these are all the guest kegs. So we have lots of beers from other breweries that we like to feature. We've got Ska Brewing, Sierra Nevada, Green Bush, Metropolitan, Bell's, Omegang. So we have lots of guest beers from breweries that we really respect, and we want to showcase their beers as well. But then you can see to my left, all my beers are in the big fun tanks because we make a full batch. So when you're in the brew house, that brew kettle is the same size as this. So when you pour a pint at the bar, it comes right out of this tank. So we have 450 gallons of a beer on tap all at once. And we just keep pouring it and drinking it until it's gone. So that was the tour of our brewery and brewing facility. Now we're back in our back bar, the Drinking and Writing Theater bar, where we have private parties, special events, and also are very proud to host the Drinking and Writing crew, Steve and Sean, who do original plays based on the connection between creativity and alcohol. It's every Saturday at 4 o'clock, and the newest show is How to Cure a Hangover, where they talk about all of their extensive research from all the hangovers that they have. And then they also showcase a lot of hard-drinking writers who either were inspired by drinking alcohol or by their hangovers. So there's a lot of really fun literary pieces to the show, and there's also a lot of fun information about hangovers and alcohol. And so it's a very creative piece, it's a very intellectual piece, and you also can drink beer during the show. So it's a fun way to do something that is intelligent, smart, and witty. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about why we're called Haymarket Pub and Brewery. We are on the southwest corner of the historic Haymarket Square, where in 1886, it was the site of a rather famous Haymarket Square riot that was kind of evolved out of the entire international labor movement. On May 1st, a peaceful protest started of folks that wanted a fair labor wage, better working conditions, and a shorter workday. It was called the 8-hour day movement. It was happening all over the world. And here, it was met with a lot of resistance from local police and authorities, and it came to a head on May 4th when, at the end of a long day of talks, police marched on the crowd, and a riot broke out, and a bomb went off. And there's still a lot of interesting thoughts on which side was right or wrong, but that's spooky. But regardless, the 8-hour workday, the creation and the organization of unions, a lot of things came out of this incident. And right a block from us on Des Plaines is a monument that the Illinois Labor History Society has erected, kind of paying homage to the speaker, to the right of free speech and the right of fair wage and of fair working conditions. And the 8 people that were arrested at the time that were tried, it came out that it was a pretty unfair trial. The governor, eventually Governor Gail pardoned 3 of them, but 4 of them were actually executed right over by the post office on Grand Avenue. So it's a pretty big piece of Chicago history that a lot of folks don't realize. But people from all over the world travel here to see the monument, and they also travel here to visit the Forest Home Cemetery, where the Martyrs Monument and the Haymarket Martyrs are actually all buried. So we take a lot of pride in the working man, the working class, and the right to sit after a work day and have a fresh handcrafted pint and enjoy life. So that's what we're all about. Cheers.